Hey, Frode,
So just texting my wife back. Um,
have at it. Looks like I'm the
well,
first here.
you are the first. I know Brandel is not coming today. He's in Vancouver on family business, so I'm not sure who will be here, but we will soon find out. So that,
I think I told you I invited a few people
yes, that's good. To this call or to the symposium or both?
to this call.
Okay, very good. I did a video this weekend that I put on YouTube, and it had 27 views about what we're doing. Then I
Huh.
put it on Instagram, and that I think that's 200. And then I put it on Twitter. So far, it's got 10,400. So it seems like
You
Twitter is
mean
the
you
medium.
mean you mean the the site formerly referred to as Twitter,
Yes, X, exactly.
Twitter.
Twitter, yes. I'll put the link in there.
Bill's here. Okay.
Let's see them race. Let's see who connects first. Fabian won. Bill came in half a second later. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Fabian, you got beautiful hair, but can we see more of you?
There we go.
Excellent.
Hey,
Bill,
Bill,
welcome.
you're muted.
Oh, don't tell him that.
Hi, everybody.
Keep you silent.
Better that way.
Yeah, so I've no idea who will be here today, but uh, one thing is a little bit about the symposium. But first, here's a link to the tweet that Fabian encouraged me to do, which turned out to be quite useful. And secondly, here's a link to the program on the day. I hope you guys can join us for the symposium at least a little bit. The first day's timing will be rough for people in America land, but the second day should be easier.
Oh, there's a second day.
Yeah, the second day is not kind of official. It's basically my living room. Or if the weather stays like today, it will be in the garden.
Mm,
Today it's 22 and sunny.
I got that. Okay. Symposium, yeah. As you can see, Bill, it's 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific.
Sorry about that.
Well, that'll be 2 to 11 for me
Oh,
in
where are you?
Doesn't get any better than that.
Mexico.
Where did you say you are, Bill?
Mexico.
Mexico. Oh, so that's kind of central then, isn't it? American time.
It's the same as US Central Time, yeah. At
Okay.
least until daylight time's over.
Oh yeah, all of that nonsense. Hi, Peter from New York.
Good morning, brunching, so I have the camera off so you won't see me eating.
Yeah, that's always a benefit.
Does that mean you're not wearing clothes?
No, I'm wearing clothes, but you don't want to see me eating.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're eating.
I certainly don't. So yeah, so Peter, we were just going through a little bit of the program for the day. I just put up a link again, and there has been, as is often the case, incredibly bad amount of articles submitted ahead of time. The deadline is in 2 days, so it's probably going to be just presentations on the day, which is fine. It's happened before. We'll see how many you want to present now. I did this video that I mentioned. Now I'm just going to copy the link again for you, Peter. I put it different places. I put it on YouTube and Instagram, and it did okay. But then I put it on Twitter, and it's got 10,400 views. So there's been a good amount of dialogue as well, retweets and stuff. So it seems the whole thing with work in XR, excuse me, I keep saying VR, it's hit a bit of a community out there. So I'm expecting that the online presence will be relatively good this time.
Ah, that looks good. I'll have to retweet it or re-exit. What do we call it now?
Re-exit.
Good question.
I like re-exit.
Okay, I re-exit.
Demusket.
Yeah, right.
Good.
A quick detail on this. Couple of months ago now, during the summer, I made a little software that when I use, let's say, X or Twitter or social networks or media too much, it redirects me to a page about the science of happiness, so that I can reconsider my choices. And it works. So I give myself a quota. Let's say I can visit X, I think twice per hour and 12 times per day, something like this. But what I changed yesterday, directing everything to the sense of happiness from Berkeley. Now what I do is, for example, for X, I redirect to Mastodon. So that per website, I can have something a bit more specific, which I consider a healthier or better alternative. I just started that yesterday to have like per website redirection, and I like it. It's I think it's a good solution to try to, let's say, habits.
That's interesting. I had a piece of software that over macOS version stopped working after a while. It was called Lisa, partly named after the kind of original Mac, but also it's an acronym for Liquid Information Speaking Assistant. And all it did was check email, and when you got a message, it didn't beep. It would speak with a real human voice. So there were these pre-done phrases by someone with a beautiful voice. So you would set relationships. So you would set, colleague, boss, girlfriend, whatever it was. So that would be known. So she would then speak, you have a message from your girlfriend. So that means you are in control of what messages would be announced when you don't check. And I found it really lowered my needing to check messages threshold, because anybody important, like a boss or a client or whatever it might be, would be spoken to me and not just a beep that's uncertain. It also had the ability to add urgent and important, because the way we speak, we don't break where the words break. So you have a message break from a friend. We wouldn't just record a friend. So that's why we could do, you have an urgent and important message from a friend. I think maybe we should bring those types of things back, and also for social media. If there is a certain amount of replies or whatever you have as a threshold, it'd be nice to be notified rather than constantly check, right?
It would be nice. I stay off social media, so I don't have this problem.
I have
I'm
stopped.
always in touch with the happiness syndrome.
I've stopped posting on Facebook because it's too easy to have an argument. It's basically designed to make you irritated so that you keep posting. So I just post on the other ones. I still look in, but I agree with you. The benefit of social media is certainly wearing off. So Bill,
Yes.
would you like to do a bit of an introduction, or would you like everyone here to introduce themselves first, or what makes most sense?
No, well, I'll do first. I'm Rob recommended this site to me. I am a longtime ELIT author, and I'm just about to have a book launch in early October, and it will and it's pretty much in many ways about text. So of course I was when Rob told me about the future of text, I thought I had to come. So and I live in Mexico, in a little town up in the mountains, about 200 miles west of Mexico City, where it's perfectly sunny, and it will get up to 26 degrees centigrade during the day. It's the dry season, so every day is perfect, just like California.
No comment.
What's that in
Yeah.
Fahrenheit for us imperial people?
What was that, Peter? I didn't hear you.
I asked, what was that in Fahrenheit for us imperial people?
Oh,
Yeah.
24, 22, 24. How much is that, Rob? I
Yeah,
can't.
good question.
It's 60s, in the 60s.
60s,
How much
yeah.
is 26 degrees Celsius
60
in
to
Fahrenheit?
70. Yeah, really nice.
78.8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, 79. Could you
24, 79. Okay.
Yeah, could you
Okay.
hear Siri speak, or was the mic off?
Yes.
Oh, we could.
Yes.
Okay. Just didn't know about that.
It's probably in the
Something
60s.
spoke.
Yeah, no, that sounds quite wonderful.
It is.
I got an email that's relevant to all of you from a friend in Syracuse yesterday. Peter and I went to Syracuse, and she's a graphic designer. She had nothing to do with university, but I was doing a bit of teaching, so that's how I know this lady. And she said she had never really understood the creativity and magic of computers, but she watched the video that I referred to, the 2 minutes of what we're doing this. And because I say in there, you know, what can happen when your entire field of view can be knowledge, she got interested. So I'm wondering also, Bill, how much VR, AR experience do you have? And what
Very
kind
little.
of interest? Okay, but
Yeah,
what
very
kind of
little.
interest do you have in that aspect of it?
Not a lot, actually. I'm more interested in the kind of well, I'm more interested in the kind of to me, at least, I'm not a linguist, so I don't know this. This may be a common knowledge, but it seems to me that we are creatures who are made of text, essentially, and all our institutions, and especially institutions, and politics and government and scholarship and all that other stuff is all it's all text, and text is well, it's different from biological life, which has a completely different way of communicating. And text communicates with itself. And now we've got AI going crazy, or people going crazy about AI. Much more complex in that department. And I'm really interested in that idea. So, you know, print words, words on anything as opposed to nonverbal communication or oral communication.
Right. Yeah, no, that's I think goes really along with the group here, because the way we define VR, AR, XR, whatever the term is, and by the way, we use it interchangeably because the whole pass-through or not, we believe that all devices will have pass-through relatively soon. They kind of already do. So, you know, forgive our use of language, but just having the opportunity for everything. It doesn't have to be a headset. It can also be projections in different ways. That's kind of the new excitement for the group.
Wow.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Congratulations, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, I'm a Tinderbox user, so
Ah,
Okay.
okay. All right.
very much. Yeah.
That's how that connects. Okay.
I get it.
Sorry, outside gardening.
Okay.
No worries. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well. Funnily enough, I've just been finishing an update to ATB Ref, as it happens.
Oh, yes. Oh, cool.
The work never stops.
No. Oh, no. Certainly not.
Yeah, and I'm also actually working on I've almost finished the 2023 in-conference citation data set, so I've been updating that now for every year for Hypertext. So one of the things actually I want to do is to see if I can get SIGWeb to just put the whole wretched thing like a big, probably BibTeX file, because I can't understand why we need to do these things twice. if I'm prepared to accept I haven't added lots of mistakes myself to the corpus, just get it done and then let everyone use it, because most of the aggregated systems from sort of Google Scholar and things are very good, but they're full of mistakes because the whole thing just goes round and round and round. And there's never a way for the well-intentioned person to actually go and correct the primary sources. So one better way, at least within a community of practice, at least say, well, look, this stuff's good.
Very cool.
Mark, I do think we need to get you a bus or something to come up with a symposium. Anyway, that's an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
It needs to happen, being in the country. So yeah, I just wanted to, whether online or not, I'm just pasting in here again the link to the event. Yeah, so the whole thing, and thank you, Bill, for joining us, and also for being the new guy, meaning we get to explain.
Okay, that's okay.
Oh, and I'm afraid I have to give you a general heads up. It looks like Mom might need me for transport the morning of the symposium, so I might not be able to pull the all-nighter to watch it live.
Oh, that's absolutely fine, Peter. And also, if we all actually now, just for a second, look on the website for the program. The second day is more geared towards you guys. And I will try to put up all the presentations recorded live on the first day. And this year, it's a bit more messy than normal. So I expect there will be more dialogue than presentations, which is fine, as long as we can organize it in a coherent form afterwards. But on the next day, we start the sessions at 4 p.m. So it's more of an evening thing. But the reason, Mark, you need to come up here is we're going to do a walking tour starting at Blackfriars. And the tour guide, he's quite amazing. He properly certified, knows what he's talking about. We're going to be looking at the beginning of the printing age.
Did we lose him?
I think we did. Hill's moment.
Am I back?
Yep, no, he's back.
Okay. That's funny. I could hear that you lose me. Right. Yeah. So we're doing a walking tour where we'll be introduced to places of interest to the early printing trade in London, in England. And also, apparently, it's the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's Folio this year or something. So,
Right, that's right.
trying to do some in the city things.
Well, this
So,
is
Frode, anybody can join on
On the Zoom?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's completely open. And the only real requirement for anybody to join is that they care about text in some form. That's really the key. We've had so many different speakers in the past, and when I introduce people to the future of text, on the future of text, I always just use their name. I don't say who they are, because first of all, it wastes time, and we're all there as equals if we have something to say. And it's only 5 minutes people get to speak anyway for a presentation.
The wrong one.
But I thought maybe this would be a good time to go around and introduce ourselves, at least Fabienne and Peter, since the rest seem to be known to Bill. A little bit of an introduction, but also why you are interested in text in an extended environment.
I'll dive in. So first, the anecdote is I have a friend now that I had to run. I had a sharp 5 p.m. meeting, and then in order to explain what the meeting was about, I didn't say it was about work, but rather for the love of text, basically. Also not about tech, but really what text is all about. So the passion of reading, writing, playing with words. So I thought that was a bigger picture view than just gadgets and toys and processes and whatnot. In the end, it's about text everywhere. So that was that was positive. On a more pragmatic level, what I do is I work for the European Parliament here in Brussels because there is an innovation department where we play with gadgets. So I have a bunch of gadgets for work behind me. It was my dream as a teenager. And when it's true that one of my favorite gadgets is augmented and virtual reality. And why I'm here specifically is because before VR, so I don't use Tinderbox, but I use a wiki called TMWiki. But I also love paper, and mostly I have a bunch of like physical mind maps, posters about whatever that I designed either on my own or collaboratively. And the problem is my office. I mean, you can see the whole thing there. It's a tiny cube, and I wish it had infinite walls. I definitely don't have the budget for infinite walls, but I do have a couple of $100 for this. So what I'm mostly doing is seeing if it makes sense, testing the hypothesis, if literally moving objects, meaning text, code, photos of poster I designed before makes sense. For now, it remains a challenge, but I don't know how to say it, like rationally speaking, but like I'm sure long term, it just I put this in my backpack when I travel, and I can still have like an infinite space with text and code in it. So right now it's very awkward. The screen is not as good and as performant as it might be, like as the screen I'm using now, let's say the old school one. But yeah, I'm intimately convinced that it's going to be yet another medium in addition to all the ones we already have, where we can manipulate text, both from, let's say, stories to code to even that's why I'm here. Pretty passionate by it and working on it on a daily basis.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I'm going to let Mark go next, even though you know Mark, because Fabian was talking a lot of poetry there, and Mark is very level-headed. But Mark, would you say that you agree that a lot of this potential is basically poetry?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't have a sort of certainly don't have a binary view as to whether it is or isn't. I mean, one of the sort of reflections actually coming back from Haptics Conference yet again is that we put these arbitrary distinctions in place, and our sort of desire to put boundaries around things and have things that sort of technical or structured or non-structured is actually not particularly helpful. And so circling around to sort of why we're here, I think my nexus in this is the sort of text as part of tools for thought and knowledge representation. And that's the thing I've sort of been noodling at for decades now, really. How we preserve knowledge as we go along. And I mean that in very broad brush terms. I really don't care to define knowledge because, again, we just go down another rabbit hole. So this is a big problem. We often spend too much time sort of defining things, and it gets in the way of our understanding. So yeah, I'm interested in all of this, and I suppose I've been now doing stuff for the future of text since Fred and I first met back at Southampton University when we were doing our doctoral studies. And I think that's all there is necessary to say.
Okay.
It is a difficult balance to basically take when trying to introduce people to this, on which direction to go in, how realistic or how pragmatic and so on. And yes, I know that Peter is coming up here as well, but just to add a little bit, for instance, Adam Verne, who is part of our community on and off, is really good at making things happen, but he tends to get quite annoyed at flowery language. And he rightly commented on one of my initial proposals. I'll just put the page in here for what we're doing, that it was, this type of XR doesn't really work, that type of XR doesn't really work. And that's very important. But I think we also need some irrational exuberance to see where we can push through and where there will be light. So yeah, it's a matter of having different minds in the community and trying to continue the dialogue. Peter.
Okay, I am an attorney, a programmer, and an independent scholar. I'm also a very long-term Tinderbox user, and really view Tinderbox as being a prototype of my dream programming environment. It's absolutely amazing how critical it is to have that end-user programming functionality available. If there's anything that program doesn't do, I can make it do it on a testing prototype basis. And if it proves out to be useful, quite often, Mark Bernstein will incorporate it into the program as a first-class feature proper. And I think that kind of an ecosystem for anything that we develop going forward is very important. The ability for the user to be able to extend it, to see whether there's a directional work before the core tool itself follows up and rolls that into the base product. Also, of course, I have so much information at my fingertips. It's just maddening at times. If at first I'm like running out of wall space to put in physical bookcases. And when I look at my digital collections, were I ever to print them all out into hard copy, I mean, you're talking Warehouse 13 here. And that's what makes AR so, because you could have a virtual space in which you could actually put all that stuff out and cluster it together and have things located in more than one location, which you can't do in a physical library. I have some books, but like I have one section of my collection devoted to books about particular programming languages, and I have another section on hypertext, but I have some books that would belong somewhere between hypertext and programming languages, and in a virtual environment, I could have a copy of them in each place, as opposed to having to wind up, and I've actually had this happen in a few cases, accidentally winding up reacquiring a copy of a book that I already have somewhere in my collection that I lost track of because it was filed in a different section in the area of the collection I was physically working in at the time. So we can get around those limitations. I'm also very excited about seeing an effort to implement a Benedictine cyberspace, which I talked about at last year's symposium. And that's the notion of having an abstract data space where you can represent higher dimensional data sets and expose them 3 dimensions at a time in separate, basically, cubes positioned in your work environment, so that each cube would represent 3 dimensions and have points in the cubes. And the points in the cubes could represent actual data artifacts, or they could represent a query for all artifacts that correspond to the values along the 3 dimensions in the first space in an unfolded space. So moving a cursor around in the 3-dimensional environment would effectively be performing a search query that would be dynamically updating the view in another 3-dimensional environment that you could reach into and grab. And it's just an absolutely brilliant approach. I don't know whether it would work because, to my knowledge, it hasn't been actually implemented beyond people doing 2D sketches of what the 3D environment would look like and some crude initial computer graphics. And we're finally getting to the point where we'll be able to test that and see how we can integrate into our everyday work environments. And the other thing I'm excited about is the possibility for ambient displays, so that I can have subtle indicators to what's happening that I don't have to be intentionally mindful of in my primary work environment, which you can't do because there's just not enough real estate on a laptop screen to be able to do that without having massive screen clutter. Okay, passing the ball back.
Thank you, Peter. And Adam, I'm beginning to wonder if you have access to listen to this live, because we were just talking about you. Were you, Adam, are you there? Was that Adam's voice?
I think he's still muted.
Yeah, he's still muted. That's okay. I see a big yellow hand, Fabian.
Yeah, just a quick remark also to bounce back on Peter's remark that well, it's still updating, but at least the physical device I can show you. So that's Monocle. that I would put. I don't have glasses, so I 3D printed some, and then I would put it there. And what I sadly typical for demo, but it's updating. But it has a little display on it, a camera, a little Bluetooth processor. So the display is in here. It's tricky to show you. I think maybe you can see. Yeah, now you can see the display, I think. So it's 600 by 400. Anyway, it's a little AR display that you can snap on your glasses. It's very, how do you say, obvious. You're not going to take like a snap picture of people like incognito or something. But for prototyping, it's pretty nice. And what Peter mentioned made me think of this. So it's an app for the monocle. It's all open source, by the way, so you can modify it however you want, reprogram it. But what's this little app on top of it does, it's connected to ChatGPT. It could be any other large language model, ChatGPT one, so that's the one they're using. So that you can just ask a question. For example, a bit earlier when we ask like what's 60, what's 28 degree Celsius in Fahrenheit, you could ask it and have the result there, just like using voice, because it's from your phone to the AI that processes it, and then you get the result as a little display, and then you can voice the thing or whatnot. So in terms of, I'm just showing it because that's not futuristic. Like that works today. We know how it works. It's all open source, and we just have to build stuff with it, make it interesting. We can replace also like Wikipedia or whatever as source of data with Tinderbox or MyWiki or whatever kind of data. But yeah, that's putting the blocks back together today, not tomorrow.
I just realized something really annoying when you showed that. So I have the Pro, and one of the benefits is that there's a lot of light leakage on the sides because, there's a bit of peripheral vision. If everything is blocked, especially in a game, if you try to move, it can be very nauseating, quite literally. So I'm just wondering if Apple is making a huge mistake by having the fake eyes. Of course, it'll be a great device for what it is, but I can see very soon that the kind of thing you're holding up, Fabian, it's basically what they've been calling AR in, Google Glass kind of thing. But even if you had something just a little bit bigger than normal glasses that was completely opaque, if you can get a sense of the room and have pass-through, a lot of the stuff we're talking about could still be possible. But you don't have the social alienation. I think the social issue, as many of you have brought up, is a bit of a killer. I just want to make a couple of welcomes, Alan, Keith, and Adam. Adam is listening. He's in Sweden, so Swedish. I'm Norwegian, so no further comments. Alan is hidden for a second, but Keith, whom I've known for a billion years. By the way, Keith, I was just talking about Lisa, because we were talking about interruptions and how that's one of the ways to deal with that. And that's how we met. Keith was the technical editor of MacUser magazine. And I walked into MacUser with, basically a fake box, pretty much. We didn't do without many printed ones of the software, and Keith reviewed it, and it's been annoying me ever since. Anyway, please, Keith, a little bit of an introduction and also why you are excited for the whole work in VR thing, please.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've got the background in print and digital. I was MacUser's technical editor for almost embarrassingly long time. Teach at university, do 360 VR media production. Did a contract at Meta for a year, ending the end of last year. Writing and designing a site for helping production teams create better 360 video content, etc. Yeah, I've no idea where all this is going, but it's really exciting.
Yeah, that's
Very short version.
well, that's the top thing. It's too important to leave to chance or to just corporations. So it can be exciting. Alan, who are you and why are you interested in text, particularly in XR? It's good to have these new people. Again, thank you, Bill. So help us remind ourselves of these things.
Hey all, I'm Alan, and yeah, I've been working in software for a while, over a decade, and have always been interested in VR and XR. Got my first taste of that when I was working at the Innovation Lab in Georgia Tech at Home Depot, where I got to work on machine learning projects in the enterprise, which is really eye-opening. And then also experiments like using VR to train people how to pack and sort, supplies. What I'm currently working on independently, I should be working on a full-time job, but my independent work is a reaction to all of the innovation that has occurred in the last year, which is really stunning and exciting. But the applications that have come out of it have seemed to be a little less exciting, as if they are just increments on top of a Jenga stack. So I've been trying to take a extreme step back in some cases. Like I have this giant scroll of butcher paper on my desk, and I use it to write things and associate things, and a camera that takes shots periodically, and I'm fitting that into the Meta's Segment Anything model, SAM, to try and differentiate and recognize these clusters of ideas as they occur. But that's the pretentious sounding part. The experimental part is, can I communicate with the machine without having to rely on formal schemas, without having to perhaps use a keyboard or even pixels? That comes into play, and that's really useful for recall. But I want to try and step back from these assumptions that we have, like browsers and apps and everything, and see, is there a different arrangement? So that is what I've been working on.
Bless me. Sorry about that. Thank you, Alan. Who would like to go next with introduction and comments? Peter's gone. Rob, you're known to most, but I'd love to hear you. I'm going to step back away from the screen, but I will be able to hear you for the next few minutes. As in, Rob, who are you and why are you excited at the virtual reality thing?
You're asking me.
I am asking you. The man in the swivel chair.
I'm going to jump into something I've been thinking about, and I guess I should skim through my career as a English professor, creative writing instructor, novelist. In the 80s, I scripted a couple of computer games, designed one, did a lot of technical writing for Apple, wrote for some Apple magazines, and in the 90s, for the Institute for the Future, doing futures research, writing scenarios and stories about potential futures. And then I followed up my longtime interest in archaeology and spent a lot of time watching people dig in the dirt, first in Central America and later mostly in Turkey and the Levant. And all of that time, especially in the late 90s when I was doing hypertext stuff, I was following my interest in writing as an intellectual tool that basically changed humankind altogether. but I'm connecting it with what happened in the Neolithic when pre-pottery Neolithic A and the pre-pottery Neolithic B, the shape of a house changed from more or less circular to square. And I realized that we had straight lines in our environment and changing our environment until straight lines now seem to be standard and unstraight lines seem to be bizarre. And I think my interest in hypertext kind of reflects my interest in trying to de-linearize what text is. But if you look at writing systems, almost all of them are largely linear. The first writing system is cuneiform. It's made with a stylus. The strokes in cuneiform signs are all lines with a little wedge at the end, because you can tip the end of the stylus into the clay. And I think that, and then you come to print, and print is printed in lines, and the lines repeat over and over again. So there's this regularity, there's this sense that the universe should be lined up properly. And I look around this room and it's full of straight lines, and I go outside and the streets and the buildings are all straight lines. And I'm thinking we've come very far from the world in which we were engendered. And maybe it would be wise to try and figure out ways to approach that world again. And my interest in AR and VR is that it allows the text to move and be manipulated by whatever, gestures or mouses or any technology that would allow us to interact with it. There were experiments in concrete poetry that mainly developed different ways of rearranging text into lines that curved around or lines that created other images, starting in the Renaissance, actually. So there's been a yearning, I think, for this kind of thing. And I got struck by Frode's presentation at the Hypertext conference that this is going to change things again, and maybe in a good way. I'm hoping. So
that was brilliant. You mentioned gestures. I just want to highlight this book. She is a friend of Barbara's, of course. Barbara's quoted in there, so I decided to email her.
Okay, thinking with your hands. Yeah, good. I
don't know if
guess
there's any-
we were in Italy for the conference and thinking with their hands. So
Yeah, and I've just been thinking about it. I think just like minds are different, I think the way we use gestures is very, very different. Some people, like my brother, he's in theater. He cannot not talk like this, really, all over the place. You know, I could easily sit on my hands for the most of a conversation. And I think it relates to how people are on Zoom as well, because hands aren't as readily viewable. For some people, that's stressful because they don't feel like coming across. And for some people, it's over much. So we're definitely going to go into issues with VR. But just to add a little comment on Rob's brilliant talking there, a lot of what you want in VR, it seems, is absolutely possible to do on traditional displays. And it isn't that long ago we could do some of this. You know, obviously, Rob, as you know, Doug Engelbart, his 68 demo, you could even write a map and each location was a link. And then you had Adobe Go Live, which allowed you to do image maps super easy, put it on the web page. The authoring systems for that have disappeared. To do even a simple image map today is hell. You know, the fact that we keep losing these capabilities is crazy. So, Rob, I think one of the greatest opportunities with XR is to refire the imagination. So if we build it for XR, can we please have it for traditional screens too? So a lot of people, especially Vint Cerf, love to say VR is essentially big monitors. If that's all it turns out to be, in a sense, fine, as long as we make them excellent monitors, right? To an extent. Who has not introduced themselves? I think there's a little bit more mark needed. No, mark. So the page that oh yeah, hang on. You're looking at, so I'm just clicking at Fabien's link here.
I can briefly introduce it, actually, if people are curious. I posted a link in the chat following showing a book on hens. It's called Microglyph. It's from a French researcher from Alpes, south of France, basically, in Grenoble. And basically, he's working, or their lab, they're working on a notation, visual notation for gestures. So you take your hands. This would be, let's say, a couple of symbols, like literally a couple. And then if you go from this hand open to pinching, that would be, let's say, a triangle. And if you pinch with a specific hand, the index, like a circle open or empty circle when it's open and a dark circle filled up when it's closed. If it's any finger, you can specify it. If it's a specific one, anyway, it's a visual notation for micro gestures, mostly around hands, and it's interesting if you work in virtual reality, augmented reality, but even in other, if you have a little device like this, yeah, that you can plug on your computer, so that even if you forget the VR AR part, but you want to use hand gestures, and instead of describing, oh, you pinch, when you pinch like this, if you've done it a couple of times, it's obvious, but if you don't have somebody to show you, it's absolutely not. And if you use text to describe the gesture, basically they double check, they try to see if people were able to actually do the gesture while described through text, and they did not manage. But through the visual notation, after learning a bit how to do it, basically, they were able to do both the gesture and describe it, so that people who never tried the gestures were able to do it more. And I think when we start to do more and more, even when it's like simply scrolling with the phone, but if we do more and more complex ones, because simply the sensors packing in VR headset, AR headsets, mobile phones, whatever, is getting more, giving a lot of freedom, basically, to shake our hands meaningfully again. I think maybe being able to read and write such notation could be interesting. And yes, I saw the little inviting the researcher to talk at the seminar. Might be a bit short, but at worst, I would invite him to speak here, let's say, on Zoom one weekend. And finally, the little thing I'm holding, it's called a lip motion. A lot. I mean, there are a few high-end VR headset that just basically have it stuck in the front. So if you take your AR headset or VR headset, you have normal cameras, the same ones you have on your phone, but some of those have the dedicated sensor stuck in there in the front, and thus it gives like very high frequency, very high refresh rate, so you can move very fast, basically. And it's going to be a skeleton of your hands, and then you can say, when I'm pinching, I can hold the text. When I'm doing this other gesture, I zoom in or out. So it's a sensor that doesn't cost much. I think $50 or euros now, and then you can use that supports it. It's mostly for desktop and laptop, because if you use AR and VR glasses, a lot have something just as good for 3 or 4 years now already.
It's called Lit Motion?
Leap.
Leap.
Oh,
I'll
Leap
put a link,
Motion.
in the chat. Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that cheap.
Yeah, so it's cheap because they fucked up their SDK a couple of years ago. Like the device itself, the sensor is very good. They made an SDK and nobody was able to reproduce their demo. Version 2 of the SDK like a year or two later, but yeah, it was too late. Nobody trusted them anymore. So it does work, but somehow, to be honest, the software part is it's not their forte. They're not so good at it. And they got acquired by another company. I forgot. Ultraleap, I think, bought them. But yeah, you can get the sensors. If people they are excited by gestures like this in the air, but they don't want the headset because they get motion sickness or whatnot, they can use a sensor on desktop and laptop. That being said, I'll just give a caution. If you use this and you use your screen is flat. I know it's obvious, but it means when you try to grab something, you have, let's say, a cylinder you try to grab, you're going to grab the projection of it on your 2D screen. And it's just not the same. That if you have the headset, no matter how much you might not like the weight and whatnot, when you grab the cylinder, your fingers are wrapped around the cylinder. It's a completely different experience. But that still exists, and that's pretty cool. And in order, if you want to scroll the page like this on your desktop, if that's your thing, you can definitely do that.
A couple of questions, and maybe the Leap Motion will work for this or not, but this really ties into stuff I'm interested in, and I think it ties into XR in general. What I love about that example and this language is that it is approaching XR from a decentralized or decoupled, way of thinking about the problem, right? So an example that's pretty inspiring is this developer named PokeRule, who actually we should get him to come here and talk. He developed a way to code with just his voice. And so the activation trigger would be a sound, and then he has a dynamic way to put accents over every word that's on the screen, and the accent will be over like a particular verb. And so he has a catchword, like a W might be whale, right? And if there's an accent over a W, not a consonant or vowels, then he would say something that sounds like gibberish, but then that gibberish within the context of the screen using Talon and what he's written would allow him to manipulate the text and the code and actually write new code. That angle is, in my mind, XR or hybrid, and I love that kind of thinking. And what you were just talking about, Fabian, I think even that work would be so much easier if he didn't have to use voice for every part of it. But and rather than pointing at the screen, he could have something that was monitoring his gestures, like we're seeing here in this microglyph. And maybe he did something to activate it, hit a button on his phone or make the talk sound, but then he just kind of like does certain gestures, sign language, right? And use that in conjunction with voice keywords, in conjunction with typewriting, that's it. I'd love to know if the Leap Motion could work with just recognizing gestures. And if there's anything that's approaching that, I mean, it seems like all of the ML models with webcams will get there at some point. And then, and any other things the group might know of that is along those lines.
So briefly, that's good actually that you mention it, because people might think, oh, I just need the sensor. It's true that even if you want to prototype, just forget the sensor, take the camera you have right there. There are a bunch of computer vision models that just if you do like your hands like this up, they're going to recognize it. It's going to make your CPU or GPU start to heat up because you start to process images, and that has a cost basically. This will be more efficient, but in a prototyping fashion to make sure it does make sense, because maybe it's not that convenient to do this. So maybe, but to try, yes, computer vision works today, and you have Google has a model for this, which I forgot, but yeah, you can use this. You can also use, I don't know if you blink a certain way, but indeed the one of voice versus signal is like, if you blink too often, maybe that's something you don't want to do. So you need to find the gesture that is really orthogonal to your typical usage. In my opinion, that's exactly the kind of thing that must be tested. Might feel good or intellectually exciting, and then maybe you feel silly doing this. Maybe you have like a good keyboard and you have a bunch of shortcuts already on it. Maybe you have a dedicated keyboard for your shortcuts, and that's avoid
Or
breaking the
or if you
flow.
just had like a foot pedal, and whenever you're pressing the foot pedal, that's when, you know, the machine knows, hey, every symbol is important.
Since Freud also mentioned Rob was revealing on the chair earlier, I had a sensor on the back of my under my chair, because also I was rotating like this, and based on what rotation I had, it would turn, say, this screen is activated, or that other device, or that other device. So you can have a bunch of sensors like this. I mean, you can, yeah,
Wow.
it's just whatever you want to do with it. For gestures, yeah, it has to be tried indeed. Like, for example, now I'm standing and I'm doing a lot more gesture than if I was just sitting. It's just, I don't know what physiologically prevents it. Maybe because I would be like this, maybe, but here I'm moving more. And it's the same for this kind of devices. If you look at it and you sit down on the chair and you're basically more passive, I guess. Again, I don't know why it is. Just seems to be for me, and I think for most people. So maybe again, if you try this or hand gesture for programming or writing, I would bet doing it standing up rather than sitting makes a big difference. And finally, just for the why I'm interested in this specifically and why I put the microglyph also there, or how I found out about microglyph and this type of visual notation of gestures, is because right now, honestly, those headsets, you can do gestures like this, and they are well supported, meaning if you use a SDK or library, you will have pinching. But if you do something, some kind of scroll on the finger, you wouldn't think that would be a natural one. That's going to work 50% of the time, just because maybe you're going to block the view, or maybe the camera are not so high end and doesn't recognize it well. So to be honest, I'm exploring this. And some of the thing you mentioned, Alan, like for example, you can imagine you program by moving stuff, you can type, you can speak, and you have the code that appear. But if you want to run the code itself, you have maybe a very subtle gesture, or maybe you go back in time, etc. Right now, that's still a little bit futuristic in the sense that you get the concept, the device will get it, but yeah, not 100% of the time. And if it becomes a tool rather than a game or a toy, you want 95% maybe of making the gesture recognize. So basic gesture now works well. Precise, fine one where you have, which are the efficient, fun one, let's say, or efficient makes it fun or exciting. I would say still a couple of years in the future, but literally a couple of years, not like 10, 20 years. It's not my expertise, like I don't build sensors like this, but from what I see, and also from the video with some from Apple, they're definitely betting on this. So I think it's a safe bet.
Excellent, thank you.
I have things on that, but Rob, please go first.
It's reminding me, pardon me, Frode, if I'm misidentifying this, but I think that Doug Engelbart was involved in the idea of creating a device that you held in your hand that you could use combinations of fingers to type with, so that you could type one-handed.
The corded
Yes. Yeah, that is what Doug Engelbart. I associate it with him. So this, an iteration of that into free space. Just an observation.
No,
but it's an old idea.
A very relevant observation, and thank you, Fabian, for putting that up. So, as the kind of convener of this kind of discussion is, of course, wonderful and frustrating. So, here's the thing: the Future of Tech Symposium is nice, but it's just 1 day/2. You know, we have these discussions often, and when we get into themes like we just did now, it's really, really cool and useful. And I'm also very concerned that we should make it available for others in the future. So that's why I'm thinking, should we be a bit more rigorous going forward and having monthly themed discussions, not necessarily monthly presentations by others, which is nice, because I can think of something already. One of the clashes in these communities tends to be, we're talking about text, but someone's talking about thinking, someone's talking about writing, talking in the same space, but about entirely different uses. So, for instance, Alan is going to host, hopefully, a session of thinking with paper, large sheets of paper. That, you know, that's something that he understands that he's working on. Then we're focused on that. Because it tends to go a bit funny. Now, I will ask you guys, first of all, I'm just going to send you a link here. If you can look at least the first 30 seconds of this video, it doesn't have sound. It has some music. You can just turn that down because I have a question. The one on top, the work in XR. Trying to judge faces, see who's seen the end of it. Okay. So the reason I'm showing it, first of all, how amazing is generative AI? All the illustrations there with, you know, prompts, images. Second, one of the things I would really like to have discussed in a session is editing. You know, like the whole idea of you're working on something on your 2D laptop or whatever, and then you go into this mode. Fabian pointed to an article recently of the speed or time it takes to get into work on VR is currently a bit of an issue. It's improved. I've noticed some of the upgrades, especially Horizon's Workroom and stuff, does make it better now. It's still not brilliant. But any comments on what kind of special themed sessions, if you at all agree with me? Because one of them I would really like to have is on editing in VR. I think that's a very potentially good use of the space.
Just quickly, I think if we were to do something like that, which I'm all for, it'd be to recognize that it wouldn't have the same character as these conversations where, because they're unplanned, discoveries come up unbidden, you know, like, and that's usually why it is so unique, right? So it wouldn't have the same texture there. So therefore, it might make more sense to treat it a little bit like a presentation where there's some planning ahead of time of, here are the topics that we want to touch on, or here are the resources that we're going to review. You know, like applying whatever XR problem specifically to what Doug Engelbart has done would be a great session.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alan. However, nobody in this community prepares ever. And I think that is a positive because it means we're free to dip in and out. You weren't here sometimes. Keith hasn't been here for a while. Totally fine. And it's totally, and I am thinking that if, you know, we've had some over the last year where we had one on how to have a discussion. You know, that was a good session we had, and a few other things. So I do think we need to do a balance. First of all, not every session should have a theme. But the ones that do, if they go way off topic, that's totally fine and good. But I'm just thinking, for instance, currently I'm interested in editing because that's what I have to do for my damn corrections for my thesis. It's very much on my mind. And for you, it's very much working on paper. For the whole, you know, if we just put a nail in the screen and say, we're focusing on this aspect today, it may just help us not listen wrong. You know what I mean? The first thing that really came across for me on the first Future of Text book is there is no such thing as text. in a general sense, meaning when one of us talks to friends and they ask, what do you do? Oh, I'm in IT. What does that mean? Right? I mean, we have two amazing authors here today. Imagine, what do you do? I write words. What does that mean? Right? I mean, it's crazy. These are such incredibly wide media types and knowledges and skills. That's why I'm thinking that may be useful. By the way, the video I posted on Twitter has now gone past 10,700 views. And that's the one where I'm saying, what can we do to make work in XR amazing? Clearly, there's an audience for it.
Right on.
On YouTube, there's 27 views.
So to explore that a little bit more, here's a question for the group then. What Fabian just brought up is an example to me of a syntax. And I'd be really interested to talk about syntax as a focus. What are other kinds of syntax? The example I brought up was a voice syntax, right? Are there ways to bridge these multimodal syntaxes? But then the question becomes, when does syntax drift into language? And is now language outside of the topic, or do we suddenly expand the topic to what are languages? We're talking about English versus Swift.
I can answer that definitively, and I would love for anyone else to answer it too. It's very core to what this is. And, even the verb, object, subject order changes between languages and all of this. If you want to learn more about that, go on TikTok. That's where I'm learning about it. TikTok is great. Anyway, that was a word from my non-sponsor. It's absolutely part of it. But I think the reason I'm so passionate about text is text before digital. The key thing was is fixity. You write it down, it's there. You could erase it, but that's a bit clunky. But you have a bit of authority from having it written down. You can write something on a huge piece of paper and it'll stay there. So it's an extension for your brain. Now we have that plus fluidity, right? That's what's mind-blowing for me. To talk about different kinds of grammar, semantics, I think that is absolutely fine and relevant and important. One of the things I argued with Doug was in Augment NLS, he had an almost complete grammar system, because you would enter a command saying do this with this, and you could actually say do this with this in this way, or even further, do this with this in this way at that time, meaning macros. Really, really important. Absolutely. So that was a very long time saying yes, I agree with you. Please, anyone else, I'm sure you have comments.
I'm thinking about textiles. The word text is obviously from that. And textiles are straight lines on a loom. And you can create a narrative in a piece of textile by the way and the color and the ways in which you cross the threads. So it is a kind of writing. And I was in a group yesterday, and the guy started talking about how in the Tudors period, there were a number of different palaces for the royal family, and they had to move from one to the other because the privies would get full. And somebody had to come in and clean the entire place. So there were like 800 people in the court, and they all had to, change venues so somebody could come in and clean out. It just is amazing to me, because the major thing that they were doing was rolling up and carrying tapestries from one palace to another. And these were like the Bayeux tapestries. Those are stories. So I think the connection with threads and straight lines and storytelling is very tight. And those are also gestures. And I'm thinking about the Luddites objecting to the mechanized pre-programmed looms, which produced an inferior product as a kind of reaction. Maybe that's what's happening now.
Kind
Love
of
it.
book
Wow.
Sorry, I don't know who was talking. I mumbled over. Please continue. I'm just looking up something.
Oh, I was just saying I love it. That's great. And even the privy story is just such a fascinating metaphor. For whatever reason, it made me think of batch versus live. That kind of reminds me of, I went to a talk here in New York with the CEO of Replit and a designer from Replit, and the talk was about machine learning and kind of end user programming. And one of the questions I had that I couldn't really explain very well, as we do in this venue, is do you think like machine learning could be used to, not even necessarily LLMs or transformers, maybe the thing after that, used to make a natural programming language? So in the same way that natural language doesn't have any, it has maybe some guiding similarities, but I wouldn't say that it has hard and fast rules a lot of times beyond, what Chomsky and others have uncovered. But it's hard to break natural language, and versus programming languages are incredibly easy to break, and it takes a long time to learn a particular programming language to get it to do what you want it to do. And at that point, you are thinking through that formal language and no longer necessarily open to the ideas that you once had. So could there be a natural programming language, and what would that look like? And the response that came back was totally justified, that AppleScript tried to do that, and that it's notorious for being easy to read but hard to write. And you could also say that a lot of higher level languages are attempts to become more natural. SQL is a good example. But I was kind of getting at something different, because the assumption there is that you can't break the syntax or the machine won't know what to do. And I wonder if we're at a point where you actually can break the syntax. Like if you were to do a markdown link, but reverse the order between the parentheses and the brackets, but the interpreter still got the gist that something is text and another thing is a destination, would it matter that you moved away from the syntax? And if you applied that to harder jobs to do, if you just did a little bit of work like we do all the time in functions inside of cells, inside of Excel, if you did a little bit of work to say, like, I want you to know that I'm not just writing here, I'm trying to get at something that doesn't quite have words. Is there a way to have a language, a kind of meet in the middle programming language? Anyway.
I see lots of hands and I've spoken a lot, so I'll be quick. But in the chat here, I'm asking for one thing. First, type your suggestions for themes for discussions, but also on this in NLS, and that the link here is to Doug using NLS. If you're writing something in the command line and you forget what the options are, you hit the question mark, the whole screen shows you all the possible options for what you can legally write next.
Lost again?
What?
Frode's frozen.
That's so-
He's back.
It's
Come
so
back, come
annoying because you don't freeze coming here. So, okay. Really briefly, two things. Please write down any themes in the chat if you want to do that for monthly chats. And then also on what you're talking about, Alan, in Doug's NLS/augment system, if you were writing a command like open a file or whatever it might be, if you forget what the next command could be, you hit the question mark key and the screen fills up with all the possible things you can now legally write. So it's a guided structured writing. So I think when what you're talking about, if someone's just going to write an AppleScript or whatever, sorry, I'm just checking if I'm frozen or not now. Then for me, that is a cognitive load that I'm not used to. But if I have a way of writing and that when I'm confused, there is the means to help me fill in the dots. In other words, a guided natural-ish language, like what Doug had, that would be interesting. Right. Fabien.
I forgot the quote, but it goes basically like this. I forgot the author of the quote too, so I'll look it up after. But a programming language is not worth learning if it doesn't change the way. So I say this because I get the point of having a programming language that is natural, that would basically be more accessible to non-programmers. I'm not convinced the ultimate goal. It's ultimate in terms of accessibility and that more people have access to programming, which I think it's definitely worthwhile. But I think for programmers, it's going backward. I think for programmers, if you struggle with a new programming language, it's because it has a new paradigm. It has a new way to make you think, I don't know, what information processing is, whatever information, how you must describe information. And I think how you wrestle with it is because it forces you to think differently. And so I'm just saying, definitely worthwhile to have natural language as a way to program, and I'm all for it, but not at the cost of the complete weirdness of a new programming language, or even an old one, but that somebody struggling with learning it has to go through those steps. And also I mention it because I have a friend, she's doing she finished actually her PhD in Switzerland on the pedagogy of mathematics. And there is something that if you make everything, like one of the idea in her field is that if you make everything more tangible, like kids playing with blocks with numbers on it, they are going to learn everything in a tangible fashion, which works great at the beginning, but at some point you need to let go. When you have like 3, 4, 25 dimensions, you cannot just use the metaphor of those cubes in space. You need at some point to, let's say, this is weird, and that's okay. So I think I'll go a bit, let's say, for experts, you don't have to go natural or non-weird. I think at some point, again, that's the beauty of it, is that it opens new ways to think, and that's extremely valuable.
I see both Mark and a rebuttal from Alan. Do you want to speak that out, Alan, since it's just on Fabien's point?
Okay, yeah, sure. Just quickly, I agree by and large. I mean, obviously, learning any discipline changes your mind and sharpens it. There are cases where, say, I'm just picking on analytic philosophy for no good reason, but there is so much to it that you really, by the time you start to grok it, you come out the other end not able to actually like take in other comes informed by analytic philosophy afterward, right? And it's really appealing to certain kinds of minds, but that doesn't mean that it is an accurate representation of the world. So you can be building castles in the air, I guess is what I'm saying. There are, even outside of analytic philosophy, there are plenty of cases where we learn disciplines that don't correspond to reality. And sometimes learning a programming language corresponds to the reality of programming, but it can also limit what we think of as priorities or values or whatever. That's how it can get distorted by learning deep disciplines. Anyway.
So much to say. So Mark, please start saying on this.
Yeah, so I shall do listening to, I think it was the sort of custom gesture language, and indeed sort of before him. It did occur to me that, I mean, I understand why we're going into this because we're trying to free ourselves from keyboards, and which also makes me think about whether gesture has differences. So if we started entirely with a sort of a caucus of, say, Chinese users, people gesturing, or whether there's much difference. I mean, I asked the question just an open-ended answer. And another thing that sort of whizzed through my mind as someone was speaking earlier was we were talking about, you know, the sort of having these sort of less formal languages and things. But I'm one thing I constantly reflect on, sort of helping out the Tinderbox community, is just trying to get people get very hung up the moment they see anything way of formal describing things, and yet they have very strong ideas that people know what they want to do in terms of their thoughts, but getting them to say, well, okay, so you actually know what you want to say, so just say it, you know, just describe it in those terms, rather than feeling that it's almost, sometimes it feels as if people want to keep a bit back privately, so they don't want to expose the whole of their thinking. So what they and in speech and writing, we managed to do this through the lens of something more hard-edged like programming. That's harder to do. This sort of slight sense of sort of privacy boundary almost. Anyway, I've offered those thoughts for what they are. Peter.
Okay, I've done a lot of thought about quasi-natural language programming, and I think that one of the problems is that you don't want to be trying to model English per se, so much as you want to model the subset of English that addresses concepts from the domain of programming language design. So, for instance, you have the notion of a closure. A closure is the idea that you're creating a function that basically wraps up inside of it its surrounding context. So if you refer to an unbound variable, which is a variable that hasn't had a value explicitly associated with it, we say the variable's unbound. And when you're forming a closure, you would basically look up the meaning of that variable in the next larger enclosing scope to get its context. And the closure would be the scope that you're creating along with any values that you're drawing from its context. So the term closure is understood by programmers basically regardless of what their programming language is, unless they've only been exposed to a programming language that doesn't have closures in them. But assuming someone's done a lot of programming in multiple languages, the notion of a closure is a meaningful term of art. Now, to make programming more natural, I would have closure be an identifier in my quasi programming language, so that you could be talking about a closure, a function. You could use apposition to associate the type with an object and say the string X to mean that the string has type X. And it would be a very natural way of expressing that, whereas each programming language might have a unique textual notation associated with that. And the whole idea of we've developed families of programming languages that basically copied one another's syntax for expressing these universals. So if you come from a C background, you like curly braces. If you're from a Pascal or object-oriented background, you might prefer explicit terms begin and end in place of the braces. If you're a Lisper, you just want to use plain old parentheses and throw away all of the custom notation as much as possible and just deal with raw lists. So we could have a quasi-natural language programming language using the terminology of programming languages in general, and it would not be unreasonable to expect end-user programmers to learn those concepts. And here, the programming language instruction research community has latched on to a very valuable notion of language levels. So the idea here is that in the context of a much broader language that has all the functionality that we'd imagine in a multi-paradigm programming language available to it, you don't let the student have access to all of that, because a syntactic error in lots of languages might well be syntactically valid, not supposed to know about yet. So the student programmer puts in a little star and he's dereferencing a scope in C, and he hasn't even learned about that yet. So it's really a typo. If he was using C, the big language, with all functionality turned on, there'd be no way for the system to realize that that was a mistake and not an intentional use of syntax in order to achieve an otherwise relatively obscure effect. And in the C++ world, the syntax for creating new types is so hideous that there are actually online services that perform the function of parsing the declaration syntax to tell you in quasi-natural language what it does. Oh, this is the pointer to an array of pointers to arrays of lists of integers, or something hideous like that. Sensible people will build these up by defining intermediate names and then referencing the intermediate names as they're layering the stuff together. And
Okay,
that-
Peter, that's going quite
I'm
detailed.
going too deep into the weeds.
Yeah, it's going, I think we're in the soil now. Never mind the weeds, but so here's the thing. I find this really, really interesting. Every couple of months, it kind of comes up something similar to this of how, you know, we should all learn to program to some extent. And I think that's completely wrong. That is very much like a poet saying, you know, we all need poetry, or a painter saying, what in the world, you don't know color theory? You know, how can you choose how to live your day? Well, you know, we all have such different brains, and I think it's really, really good to highlight the benefits of different things. But I see all kinds of hands and icons coming up here. But I think one thing we probably agree on in this community before before I get shut down now is one thing we really want is to have richly interactive environments. Programming is one way we can deal with that. but
Okay,
there's
just
also-
popping back up one level to finish up. The idea of the language levels is you just introduce one or two features at a time so that the system's able to spot mistakes of understanding. And the person to look at for that kind of research is Sharam, and I can't pronounce his last name. It's Indian, but he's at Brown, I think, was the last spot he was. Might have been Brown last time. Not sure offhand, but if you like Google Sharam and programming languages book, that would probably be enough to pull up his research for you. Also, the other thing to take a look at is the Inform 7 language, which tries to model the real world using natural language and map that to programming language structures.
Okay, but Peter, this is where the point comes in from the other side of it, is that there is a presumption that programming languages can address the real world. And I don't think it can any more than other ways of dealing with the world. So I think it's definitely an important part of it. But when I'm talking about richly interactive environments, there are many ways we should be able to interact with our information. Have we? No, there's Peter, sorry. That's all I wanted to highlight. Fabienne, over to you.
Okay, I found him. I just put the link in the chat.
Thank you. I'll check the research because never heard of. I mean, high level, low level, yes, but anyway, I'll dig into it. Thank you. Yeah, I completely disagree. Everybody should learn programming. To me, it's like the debate about you don't have to learn how to write to be an author. You don't have to be to write poetry or anything. But if you want to be able to go outside and learn about the world, you need to be able to read. And then eventually, if you want to share your thoughts, to write. The problem is the real world today is this. We discussed through Zoom, me through the browser, most people through the app, a computer. So that's the real world. So in my opinion, learning a programming language, it doesn't mean you're going to be a professional programmer. It have to mean you like it, but it does give you an affordance back to a world that is now intertwined with the technology that runs on programming languages. It doesn't have to be a passion. And again, you can hate it, but in my opinion, somebody that grows up today and doesn't learn programming once in their life, even if it's to say, I hate it, it's terrible, I don't want to touch it ever again, in my opinion, would be a big mistake. In my opinion, most people should, if they want to push back, like if they say, Google is shit, or Meta is horrible and whatnot, and if they want to do more than this and build something better, either they have the resources to delegate it to someone, and they have the patience, let's say, to say and understand what's feasible or not. But in my opinion, again, the real world today is through computers. Like, even if it's through your mobile phone in your pocket, your headset, smartwatch, whatever, like we're in through technology. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just trying to see that for like the vast majority of people, yeah, it's through computer and thus through software, and thus programming is a way to say, stop, I don't agree with how we interact. I don't agree with how I must think through whatever spreadsheet or software. And thus I can change it back.
Okay. I look forward to seeing you in London. I respect you greatly. So I'm very glad that you are saying this, because I think it is actually quite chauvinistic, because you have one way of thinking. And I do agree with you. We should all take some programming in school. That I agree with. Like, everybody should do painting and music. Of course, everybody should have a well-rounded kind of. Sorry, it wants me to lower my hand. You know, that's easy. But I think there is a kind of an implied, and Alan addresses it well in text. Would you say that should be able to fix the car engine, at least understand what may be broken? No, absolutely not. I drive a Tesla, right? There is no carburetor. There is no spark plug. If Tesla breaks down, I call Tesla. That is today. I can't become a programmer of Tesla. And of course, we could have a discussion saying, should EVs be more accessible to end user modifying and all of that? That's an interesting thing. But the thing is, I mean, we have different brains. My brain, I've had to really look at it for the last couple of weeks of what am I crap at and what am I good at in the world? And I have a very creative brain, meaning the left side of my hemisphere deals with novelty very well. The right side of my hemisphere, the one that learns stuff, is actually not that brilliant, right? Edgar had to do a poem. I had problems memorizing it. And for me to go through code and to find out where there's a typo, I did a very expensive IQ test about 10 years ago, where I found out for creative solutions, I had 90 to 100% answers. When it came to check formatting in a phone book, I got 10 to 20. I could not be hired as a secretary. So with all loving respect, Fabian, to say that programming is a skill we can all learn if we're just patient enough is chauvinistic, that kind of brain, absolutely horrific. With the caveat that we should learn the basic, all of us, so we can talk to a programmer. I agree with that. But I think in this community specifically, and because we're also trying to broaden the community to more kinds of brains, I think we should be careful with how we characterize people should be like this. Because just my last thing to put in here, having spent a significant time in California with really wonderful dog-related people and so on, generally it comes down to, if people just thought more like us, the world would be better. That's really dangerous. And having spent a week in hypertext, I mean, Mark and I had a huge fight. I consider Mark a very close friend. I love him dearly, but I got so angry, and I don't often get angry. I got so angry with him, I couldn't be near him for a full day. Honestly, now I can't remember why or what it was, but it was a result of us having very different kinds of minds. There was something we interpreted very differently. And as a result of that, and other people, you know, we have invited a few people to the symposium, which would not fit with any of this kind of talk, and that's what we need. So, Fabian, thank you for being a wonderful human being, and therefore allowing me to be very clear and frank in my slight disagreement of your perspective. Mark, you can be the buffer between me and Fabian now, please. And you're muted, which is not actually helping this time.
Okay, I will unmute myself now. Sorry, apologies. Poor protocol. Yes, I mean, this echoes for me the thing I think back to when I did my masters, and we were a sort of a mixed group from the arts and the sciences, and we were put in front of all these subjects, and everyone basically gave us the thing from the ground up as to how to do what they did, which was completely and utterly useless, because it didn't tell us. No one gave us the so what. Why should you bother to sit in a room with someone who does this? And I think we shy away from asking the so what, and we ought to do it a bit more, because no, we do need to do a lot more of these things, but we tend to retreat into something we feel comfortable with, and unintentionally that means that we tend to describe what we do in terms of the domain we sit in, and creates an unintentional barrier. But I don't dissent from sort of Fabian's general notion, because for where we are, it's, for instance, the need, the first car I had, I definitely needed to learn some mechanics just to be able to get to the end of the road without, because it would break down all the time. The next car I have, if I have another one, won't probably have an internal combustion engine. So that knowledge I can let go of, but there are other things I need to understand. Noodling around the edges of programming, but I don't regard myself as one, because I don't have a formal understanding. I've never managed to grok it completely, but I'm very happy that there are people who do understand. I'm very happy to be in their company, because at the edges there's always an interaction to be had and a useful crossflow. Going back to my this comment, and one of the things I sort of like when I go to the hypertext is I see the arts and the tech, as it were, sitting together, because there's a really useful cross-pollination of ideas. Once you can take something that seems a thorny problem in your own area, when looked at, abstracted into something different, I find I still see new patterns or new opportunities. Doesn't mean the solution's any easier, but instead of sort of constantly pushing on the pull door, you realize, okay, there is another entrance to the building. If we go around the side, we come from a different direction. If we take a different perspective, we can do something. So, and that seems to be the kernel of things here. So I do think we get rather hung up on the term programming, which is quite freighted at the moment because it's close association with computers and software. But it's, in a way, it's just a declarative method to try and say unambiguously what you wish to do. And that is wonderful, rich things in these new sort of visualizations we have in AR and XR and things. Then we do understand that they don't exist without someone telling them what to be. And so the struggle is, how do we find an easy and accessible form to declare those things? Because, as Freud rightly brings up, not everyone is going to be able to sort of sit down and describe it in a very hard-edged terms. But obviously we need more than a small number of people to be able to do this. But there's always a learning curve, and I just think I always worry about us being too prescriptive about what we should or must do, because I think these things normally turn out to be wrong.
Thank you, Mark. Bill, did you also have your hand up? Do you want to go off?
Fabian.
I saw a physical hand. I'm not sure if you meant.
Yeah, I'm happy with saying the should than what we should and must do. I really think learning programming in school is important, because again, it's about being able to fix. I think the car is a funny example. I don't think having a car you cannot fix is such a good thing. I like every time I mention, let's say, this gadget or that gadget, I mention if it's open source or not, because I think, again, if you have technology all around you, phone being whatever, and you have less and less control of it, and it has more and more control of you, it's a problem. It's really, so it's just about power, basically. It's much more fundamental than pretty much anything else. Like, a lot of people walk around with a device that they don't understand, which is a little bit problematic, but I can imagine you don't have to understand everything about it, like nobody does. I don't understand, let's say, the physics of how the atoms in the processors go through. Doesn't make me unable to use properly the device. But if the device itself has some limitation to control my behavior, then it's about power. And it doesn't mean everybody should think a certain way, but if you relinquish too much of power, I think it's a problem. It's more about, let's say, democracy and being able to say no to technology and directly, without having to wait for regulators. Again, like, I work for the European Parliament, so I do have trust in some political entities. I do think it's positive, but at some point, if you're not able to directly push back on the boundaries, on the economical imperative in companies that are so gigantic and tentacular, to me that's just scary. And one of the way not to just say stop technology and reject it like as a block, but change it is by programming simply. And I think it's scary for me if I imagine kids going to school and they just can't do this. It doesn't mean they have to do it any specific way.
You're arguing against nobody now, because we have I think everybody agrees, even me, that there should absolutely be some teaching of programming in school. I mean, my son is 6 and he's learning programming in the rough sense now. Absolutely. But just briefly, before I hand over to Keith, who hasn't spoken anything, we're not talking about relinquishing control. That is way too simplified a term. So let's talk about Brexit a little bit. One of the great discussions around Brexit, and because you're the European guy, it was actually one of our political leaders. I won't mention who because he's too annoying. But people are talking about, Britain wants sovereignty back. And he explained sovereignty isn't like a cube that is hard and you protect. Sovereignty, something that you expand by going into other systems. So he was saying we have more sovereignty, more control by being an active part of this bigger union, right? I think it is very much like that. The act of programming, I think Mark is completely right. It isn't necessarily typing in stuff and doing commas and all of that stuff. There are also other ways to richly interact with your information. One of the things I do, photography and video, I think it's very relevant because, as you can see in these 2 videos, one of them has 3D effects and all of that stuff. That's really easy for me. But so many people who talk down about text, they say the future is just going to be video and 3D and stuff, but they don't actually have the skills to make it, right? And of course, I see Bill shaking his head. I agree with you, Bill, completely. The future is not just going to be that. But if you are a proponent of this other media, learn how to use them. It's very hard, right? But it is a way of having different kind of control of your digital information. It's not just about writing lines of code, which I'm sure you agree with, Fabian. Over to you, technical editor of Mac User Magazine.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the idea that we should understand everything we use, but we can't. I mean, we have the concept of standing on the shoulders of giants, and we have to do that. We can't exist in today's world without doing that every minute of every day. So yeah, I mean, people should understand more, and I would love everyone to be exposed to programming concepts and learning how to think in that way at school. But yeah, I mean, we can't understand everything, and most people would just go cold at the idea. It's amusing because I've heard people use that argument in a very mistaken way, nothing to do with, say, we need to expand our understanding and extend programming, but people use that argument to say why Android is better than the iPhone. So, because you can go in and you can change everything with it, but who cares? I don't want to do that. I want something which is more elegant and isn't going to behave differently every time I turn a corner. So it's just sort of a reaction, the whole to the idea that I have to know everything. In my unofficial job description at Mac User, know everything about everything, so that I was the one everyone came to. But yeah, people can't do that. So there's a sort of a balance. There's a point for everyone at which they get to that point and they don't want to go any further. And
So
probably shouldn't, other than learning programming in school, which I absolutely wholeheartedly endorse.
Thank you, Keith. That was perfect. Alan, I can see you're raring to go.
No, nothing controversial. Actually, I think it's just in support of everything that we're saying here. Yes, there is some what you were saying, Frode. Some I forget the slanderous term, but I don't know, privilege. Yes, there's some privilege involved, but also my wife's not a programmer, but once she started to figure out how to do some things in Excel and was essentially able to make a an app, it was incredibly empowering. suddenly like, things clicked and it was like, oh, wow, I can do this, and I don't have to pay for a tool. I can just sort of hack into these cells and get there. And that is an experience I think that, yeah, we should all have if we have the opportunity.
This is really, really important. Yes, absolutely. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, doing image maps used to be something we could do, and now we can't do it. It's not programming, but it is a powerful thing to express yourself in different levels. And also, if we just look at the simple thing of writing text for action, that is really, really important. And we've discussed that in this community several times. The example of you write in a document, a code or something that starts a code, and the user has an opportunity to run code that's with data in the document or somewhere else. These are really important things. And I also, yes, Keith, I completely agree. Let's just make sure we don't get too blinkered on this discussion. Peter, please.
Yeah, I think the problem with teaching programming in school is that all too often it degenerates to, here's how to write a program in this particular programming language, which, as it turns out, is going to be obsolete long before you get your diploma at the end. What we should have is more of a survey of programming languages. Not even asking you to necessarily write any programs whatsoever. Just, here are the big ideas. There are certain classes of programming languages, kinds of capabilities that they provide you with, so that you can have that conversation with someone who's taken the time to delve into it deeply enough and can write the program. You're not going to be very effective communicating with the programmer if your only exposure to programming has been writing toy Java programs. And if you had just like that generic survey course, just talking about, here are different ways of approaching the problems, that would be useful even outside of the context of writing programs, because a lot of the programming paradigms correspond to ways to model the world in general, and not even necessarily having a computer have anything to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely important. But let's talk about Harry Potter. Right? My son is in Harry Potter land now, which there are many issues around her and all of that. Let's not waste our time on that. But being able to write clearly is partly what programming is. And writing different types of programs is kind of like different, literally, languages, right? Completely agree with that. And also, as Keith is also saying, the concepts are really, really important. Yes, I agree with that also. But we should also be a little bit in Magic Harry Potter land, because if you reduce programming down to, you got to specify what action is to be done on what data. That's the core of programming, whether you're programming a computer or, like we did in the Army, programming what we're going to do next week. Programming means to specify what shall be done. These are all very, very important things to do. But I think the reason I'm kicking back a little bit here is my absolutely great fear of running out of imagination for how we're going to work in these fully immersive environments. And I think that to one extent, only one extent, if we think from programmer point of view, technically point of view, we are not open to all the other points of view of magic scratching on the wall that comes out and flies across the room like a serpent, and then you're golden. Crazy different thoughts. We have to include that. So that's why I would much rather see Fabienne fighting with a completely technologically ignorant artist and something coming out of that discussion, rather than the artist having to learn Fabienne's language completely and vice versa, so to speak. A little bit of both perspectives, fine. But I mean, look at us. We are all a bunch of males, for one thing. We have a lot in common. It's way too scary to go into the next universe with only our perspectives.
So for the anecdote, this weekend, Saturday morning, I'll go back to a school in a challenged neighborhood in Brussels. I'll have 4 or 5 VR headsets, and the kids will be able to grab text and code in order to change the environment around them. Because that's the whole point for me, is to make them see that it's not about Excel. It's not about the syntax. It's about power, being able to change what they see literally in front of them. And again, at no point I will tell them it's easy. Well, at least if I do, maybe I'll give them. They will be able to slap my wrist or something, somehow punish me if I say this, because it is indeed bullshit. It's not easy. Yet my argument to them will be that it's worthwhile. And again, without necessarily having to become a professional programmer. So I mentioned this also to say that I don't just say it, like the philosophy of it, but I invest some of my personal time to do this. And I'll do it in VR because I think it's more exciting and more, I don't think it's going to stay the future for too long. But also because if anybody here has some ideas in terms of anything related to it, being storytelling, scripting, how to visually present this, how to link something that might be abstract to in practice, like how the group literally or grab code and text. I'll be all ears. You have my email. Drop me any ideas, no matter how crazy it might sound. Doesn't mean I would be able to implement it, but I would be very happy and eager to try.
Yeah, Mark, please go ahead. I'm going to show the book next. I have a book.
I was just quickly going to say that funnily enough, and not to be a contrarian, I don't actually have a sense of fear that our our imagination is going to be too constrained. The thing that I still get excited by is actually finding that the flow is not one way. I think we tend to assume that the technical aspect of our what the society we created tends to compress the artistic, but actually I think the flow goes both ways. And I'm so often somebody saying, well, can't I do this? And they didn't know how to manifest it, but someone will say, no, that's actually now you said what you want, I can make one of those. So it keeps coming back about having the interchange. So often what we have is we have too much capability in the wrong place. So we have lots of people who can make things, but they're not making the right things because no one's asking them to make interesting things. So the more we keep that mix there, we don't fall into the rut of just making quotidian things because that's what we're used to. So I know, colour me an optimist, I think, on this.
Okay, right. Very important points. As far as running out of dreaming, we did that in 20 years with a personal computer. So, that's the precedent. After the 80s, there was no new paradigms in how you interact with a computer, none. So that's just a scary, I feel, reality. But, when it goes back to Fabienne's point, here's quite an interesting book. It turns out it's mostly a book on autism, and they have some very interesting studies of different types of minds, where you fall on basically introversion, extroversion, people versus programming, and so on. It's interesting stuff. And Fabienne, I'm wondering why you're kind of kicking back so much, because I have agreed with you that it is absolutely good to teach kids the basics of programming, and absolutely agree with what Peter is saying, that it is important not to teach the syntax of one language. It really should be the concepts. But I also really do think that we have to be very careful about saying things will get better if people think this way rather than a different way. That's what I'm really kind of, the work that you're doing, Fabienne, both professionally and on the weekend is, am I frozen?
I missed a sentence at least.
Oh, that was probably the nice sentence. No, I'm just not sure whether it's over to Alan. We're running out of time anyway.
Well, this is okay. This is a hard left turn to possibly a totally different topic, but I want to bring it up because it's something that I sense and I don't quite have the right words to explain it. It would be along the lines of current discussion around the value of learning programming, whatever programming is, and its empowerment. And then to me, the flip side of that is teaching kids to write a resume, teaching kids to write the perfect resume, right? And that's to me like a not a parallel. It is a perpendicular scenario, because you can teach someone to write the perfect resume and they're still submitting it into the ether and with no idea as to whether it's going to work or not, right? So at what point do we learn skills that are, I mean, that's essentially like astrology or something, right? Like you can write the perfect resume and it'd still be rejected on all sorts of other grounds, right? So, and that's because it's deeply embedded in a system that is largely opaque to the person presenting the resume, right? In some ways, coding and programming is the antithesis of that, but in some ways it's not, right? In some ways, there is a degree where you're submitting symbols into a system, and there's opacity on the other side of the system. You don't know why it works or it doesn't. So is there a way of thinking about this problem where we do, is it better to learn skills in systems that are transparent and interactive, or does it have more to do with the point you will be given or offered in society if you master X skill, even though it may be magic?
Right. When you're talking about the resume, there's also this thing of the non-literal. One of the great examples I came across recently is teach the kids to take a selfie of themselves in front of a projection like they're presenting to an audience. So the people who see their LinkedIn profile or see the resume will think they're so interesting there, people are listening to them. So there's a lot of not literal stuff to be taught too, the psychology thing of it. And also, if you look at building a house, what is most important? Is it the engineering, the architecture, the interior design, the psychology of spaces? It's not really a meaningful distinction which bit they have to work together, and each one of them should really understand how to communicate to the other specialities, right? It is really important the interior designer has some idea of engineering and vice versa. So I'm absolutely not throwing away programming. I am highlighting there are many different ways to be literate, and understanding some of it is. And one really important thing is that a lot of technological things today are not end user programmable at all. So unless someone makes their own app, right? If someone has an iPhone, and I know that Fabian doesn't like it, it's a locked-in environment. There's also the Macintosh, and these things exist. They are realities of the world. Do I agree that we should have more control as end users? I do. And that is a nice bit of wishful thinking. But there is also a literacy of using the things as they are, knowing how to use Instagram to increase your reach or your social standing. These are important aspects too. It is not just the putting code together to make things move in an app. Fabian, we're running out of time. Over to you.
So I'll be quick. To me, that's Stockholm syndrome. Like, yeah, you have the box and you're happy to be in that box. I absolutely disagree with this. It's like, oh, I have the white sheet of paper. I need to stay in that frame. Fuck that. I disagree. Just because it's about power. Just because it's big companies that dictate how you must think. I absolutely hate this. It's how it is most of the time. I'm not saying everybody should 24/7 reconsider everything all the time and reprogram everything, but like it triggers me so much that somehow we are locked into those boxes, precisely because that's the current statu quo. That's how most of us use most of our digital tools, and that really does. It doesn't mean that we cannot embrace constraint in order to be more creative, but we should have the choice to say, okay, I accept this constraint, I'm within this constraint, and I'll go crazy without the piece of paper. But otherwise, it's again, because it's so intimate, like most of us go to bed with a mobile, we have it all the time. It's so pervasive that I really, it does trigger me. why do I also say this is because I started to think about, let's say, a concept or an idea a couple of weeks or months ago, which I like to think or call responsive programming, which is to say you program the device you have right now in your hand with the device itself. Most devices are not like that. Most devices, first you just use them, but then if you program them through another device, typically your computer. So by default, you're a user. And I think at the very least, that must be challenged.
First of all, absolutely agree with you. Just a small caveat, something like Final Cut and Motion that I used for that little video where I do things coming up, there's no way a normal person could program that. So that is, of course, an example of, you use the tools available. No, with all the color grading, and no, Fabien, no. Everybody shouldn't have to sit down and write a video editor from scratch in 3D. That's not.
Nobody does. Sorry to interrupt. Nobody does it. That's the whole point of open source. It's collaborative. You're not on your own. You're not alone.
Yeah, but look, a lot of us don't want to compile code and check on bugs and all of that. You should be able to buy some things, but look, Fabien, what you're talking about is so absolutely crucial to the community here. So let's not get in a wrong kind of an argument, because especially moving into XR, we need to live as close to Fabien's reality as possible. There's no question about that. And we need to have it open for different people to make different systems. Absolutely no question about that either. There are some questions about, is it typing a line of code or is it moving a block about? That can be discussed. But we cannot afford to just go into having Final Cut Pro in XR. So Fabien, on the deepest level, I think all of us agree ridiculously much on this point. It is absolutely hugely impossible. Now, Brandel is in Canada for some family thing this week. I wanted to ask him some questions related to this. One of them is, will we have disk accessories in VR, in Vision OS? Reason for that is, can people just make a tool that is there, or does it have to be kind of in a box already? I'm asking that as a little bit of a Trojan horse question, as in how open is it at this point? But, so yes, thank you, Bill.
Oh no, he froze again.
Feel free.
Frozen
anybody-
Frode.
Get the smelling salts.
Yes. And
Many are cold, but few are frozen.
am I frozen again? Oh, great. Okay. All right. Yeah, no, I've got to heat some noodles for the family, but
All right, well, I have to
Terry,
go
Fabien,
as well.
we do agree with you. At least I agree with you. See you all later. Bye for now.
Take
Have a
care,
great week,
everyone.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.